In a room with a single flickering bulb, someone stands frozen. The air is heavy, the silence louder than thought. There's just enough light to see their trembling hands, but beyond that glow, nothing but darkness. Every small movement feels dangerous. Every shadow seems alive. They tell themselves that staying close to the light will keep them safe. That if they just avoid what lies beyond its reach, nothing can hurt them. But deep down, they know the light is fading. And sooner or later, they'll have to face what waits in the dark. We've been raised to believe that light means safety, clarity, success, goodness. We chase positivity like a religion. We post it, quote it, wear it like armor. The world celebrates the ones who smile through pain, who say, "I'm fine," while crumbling inside. We call it strength, but it's a disguise. We've been trained to fear the other half of life, the stillness, the sadness, the shadows that whisper truths we don't want to hear. But here's the paradox. The more we chase the light, the more the darkness grows behind us. Every fear we ignore becomes larger. Every emotion we suppress sinks deeper, until one day it begins to leak through the cracks, through anger, anxiety, burnout, numbness. That's when we realize that the things we've been running from were never outside us. They were always within. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the essence of our hidden struggle. The darkness isn't evil, it's unacknowledged truth. It's every feeling we deemed unacceptable, every part of us that society told us to hide. Our jealousy, our rage, our grief, our desires, they live there, waiting to be seen. But instead of facing them, we numb them. We keep scrolling, we keep achieving, we keep smiling. Anything to stay in the light. We call it progress, but it's avoidance. We tell ourselves we're healing, but we're only decorating the walls of our denial. True healing doesn't happen in light. It happens when the light fades, and you sit in what's real. The quiet moments where no one's watching, when your mask slips and your soul whispers, "This is who I am." That's where transformation begins. Most people spend their lives fearing that moment. They believe that if they look too closely at their pain, they'll fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if falling apart is exactly what frees us? We keep thinking strength means holding everything together, but real strength is letting what's false fall away. We avoid darkness because we think it's the opposite of light. But in truth, it's the womb of it. Without night, dawn means nothing. Without suffering, joy has no shape. The darkness doesn't destroy us. It shows us who we've become by hiding from it. Every shadow we deny becomes the part of ourselves we least understand. And what we don't understand, we fear. Imagine this. The person standing under the flickering bulb finally steps forward. The light behind them shrinks, and the shadows seem to rise up, alive and infinite. Their heart pounds, their breath quickens. But as their eyes adjust, they start to see shapes, contours of what once terrified them. The dark isn't empty. It's full of truth. It's everything they buried, the grief they never mourned, the anger they never spoke, the love they never allowed. And in that stillness, they realize something. The darkness was never here to consume them. It was waiting to be seen. Our darkness is not a curse, it's our teacher. It holds the map back to wholeness. Every time we turn away from it, we lose another piece of ourselves. But when we turn toward it, something changes. The fear doesn't disappear, but it becomes smaller. The light returns, not as a blinding illusion, but as understanding. We fear the dark because we've mistaken comfort for peace. Comfort keeps us safe. Peace requires truth. And truth often lives in shadows. We live in a time where people think enlightenment is a glow you earn after enough meditation, affirmation, or achievement. But enlightenment isn't the absence of darkness, it's the intimacy with it. It's the courage to sit with what hurts and still whisper, "I'm here." Maybe the light we've been chasing has never been outside of us. Maybe it's been trapped inside the very darkness we've been taught to fear. Because the moment you stop running from your shadow, you begin to see that it was never chasing you. It was guiding you back to yourself. And so the question lingers like a whisper in the dark. What if the light you're chasing has always been hidden inside the darkness you run from? There's a moment, quiet and strange, when you finally stop running. When you realize the shadows you've feared your whole life aren't trying to destroy you, they're trying to speak to you. That's where the real journey begins. Not upward, not toward light, but inward, toward what you've refused to see. Carl Jung called this process shadow integration. The shadow, he said, is everything we've rejected about ourselves. Our rage, jealousy, laziness, greed, even our untamed creativity. All the pieces we were told were too much, too dark, or not good enough. As children, we learned what parts of us were safe to show. The rest we buried. But buried things don't die. They wait. And in time, they rise again, often in disguise, through anxiety, projection, addiction, or sudden bursts of anger that seem to come from nowhere. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the part of us that wants to be whole again. Yet our modern world teaches us to live split in two. The polished mask for others, and the hidden storm underneath. We build identities around light, ambition, kindness, confidence, and secretly fear the chaos within. We learn to speak the language of self-improvement while suppressing the voice of self-honesty. The danger of this split is subtle but devastating. The more we deny the shadow, the more power it gains. It controls us from behind the curtain, shaping our choices, our desires, our relationships. You can hear it in the perfectionist who cannot rest, in the people-pleaser who can't say no, in the person who avoids intimacy because they fear being seen. Each one is haunted by their own unseen reflection. Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, "Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster." But he wasn't speaking about external enemies, he was warning us about internal denial. When we demonize our darker emotions, we become ruled by them. We become rigid, moralistic, defensive. We cling to ideals of purity and light while secretly resenting the parts of ourselves we've exiled. True strength lies in self-honesty, the courage to say, "Yes, I am capable of cruelty, envy, weakness, and fear. But I am also capable of awareness, compassion, and transformation." When we stop pretending to be only one side of ourselves, we stop living in contradiction. Imagine two people walking through life. The first hides behind perfection, smiling, polite, endlessly agreeable. They repress their frustration until it leaks out as exhaustion, resentment, or passive anger. The second person, instead of hiding, begins to listen to their inner tension. They allow themselves to feel rage and sadness without acting destructively on them. Over time, something unexpected happens. The emotion transforms into clarity. The rage becomes fuel for self-respect. The sadness becomes empathy. The shadow becomes a teacher. This is the alchemy of integration. The process Jung described as transforming darkness into consciousness. It is not about becoming good or pure. It's about becoming real. Society doesn't encourage this. It celebrates the curated, not the complete. We are told to be positive, productive, attractive. We filter our images, edit our flaws, and label discomfort as weakness. We've built an entire culture that's allergic to shadow. We call sadness depression, we call stillness laziness, and we call solitude loneliness. We've forgotten that darkness has its own kind of wisdom, a silence that teaches, a stillness that restores. Alan Watts once said that our obsession with light is born from misunderstanding duality. We believe that light and dark are enemies, when in truth, they define each other. Without shadow, light has no depth. Without darkness, brightness blinds. Yin cannot exist without yang. Every wave of joy requires a depth of sorrow to give it shape. The universe itself breathes in contrasts, birth and death, chaos and order, silence and sound. Why should the human soul be any different? And yet, we live as if our darker emotions are failures to be fixed. We treat anger as sin, fear as weakness, grief as something to get over. But what if these feelings aren't flaws, but messages? What if anger is a boundary crossed, fear is a call for awareness, grief is love with nowhere to go? What if darkness is simply life asking for our attention? Nietzsche spoke of the abyss, the void we must look into to find meaning. Most of us spend our lives avoiding that gaze. We distract ourselves with work, relationships, and endless consumption to avoid feeling the void within. But the abyss doesn't go away. It waits until silence returns, when the noise fades, and there's nothing left to hide behind. That's when you meet your shadow face to face. And that meeting is terrifying, because it strips away illusions. You realize you are not only the image you've built, not only the thoughts you believe, but something deeper, something untamed, ancient, and whole. You realize that light and darkness were never separate forces, but two movements of the same soul. Think of a seed buried in soil. From the outside, it looks lifeless, trapped in darkness. But within that darkness, life begins to form. The seed splits open, roots grow downward before anything rises toward the sun. Growth begins in darkness. Every flower you've ever seen was once hidden underground. Every awakening begins the same way. When you look at your own life, you'll see this pattern everywhere. The breakup that shattered you taught you who you are without attachment. The failure that humiliated you showed you where your ego ruled. The grief that broke your heart reminded you how deeply you can love. Every shadow moment, though painful, carried a truth the light could never show you. To befriend your darkness is to reclaim your humanity. It's to understand that being whole doesn't mean being happy all the time, it means being present with all that you are. The pain, the joy, the confusion, the peace, they all belong. The illusion of light-only living is seductive. It promises safety, simplicity, clarity. But it comes at a cost, the loss of depth, of authenticity. Because what we call light, without shadow, is just denial wearing a halo. The more you hide from your darkness, the more it controls you. The more you face it, the freer you become. It's not about conquering fear, it's about listening to what it's been trying to say. If darkness is where the stars are born, then maybe your pain is not a punishment. Maybe it's the sky preparing for its light. And so you start to wonder, if darkness has always been the birthplace of stars, why have we spent our lives running from the night? There comes a point when the light you've been chasing begins to flicker. The affirmations stop working. The routines that once kept you grounded now feel hollow. You wake up one day and realize you've lost the energy to keep pretending. That's when the descent begins, not the fall into despair, but the slow, necessary unraveling of everything false. It doesn't happen dramatically. It starts quietly. Maybe you lose interest in the things that used to excite you. Maybe the friends who once made you feel alive now only echo emptiness. You try to fill the silence, but nothing fits. That's the darkness calling, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Most people run from that moment. They distract themselves with motion, with achievement, with noise. Because silence feels unbearable. Stillness feels like death. But that's the paradox. What feels like dying is often the beginning of rebirth. The ego, the mask, the false identity must dissolve before something real can emerge. Every myth, every spiritual tradition, every hero's journey begins with descent. Orpheus descending into the underworld to find his love. Christ entering the tomb. Buddha sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, unmoving as demons whispered in his ear. Jung called it the night sea journey, the passage through chaos that strips you bare so the soul can be reborn. You can't rise without first falling. So you descend. You face the things you swore you never would, the grief you buried, the shame you carried, the rage you denied. At first, it feels endless. The darkness has no shape, no map, no promise of light. You start to think you're losing yourself. But that's only because the self you thought you were is dissolving. In that dissolution, you discover something strange. Beneath the noise, beneath the fear, there's a quiet awareness, something unbroken, observing everything. You realize the pain isn't the enemy. It's the voice of the self you abandoned, asking to be seen. When you stop fighting the darkness, it begins to change form. Fear turns into presence. Grief turns into depth. Shame turns into compassion. You start to see that emotions aren't punishments, they're messengers. Each one carries a fragment of your truth. The transformation doesn't happen in a burst of light. It unfolds in whispers, in tiny acts of honesty. It's when you finally admit to yourself, I am not okay, and allow that truth to exist without judgment. It's when you sit with your loneliness and realize that it's not emptiness, it's space. Space where something new can grow. Slowly, your relationship with pain shifts. You stop asking, "How do I get rid of this?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" You begin to understand that the parts of you you've been trying to escape were never obstacles, they were keys. There's an alchemy that happens in that surrender. When you let the darkness speak, it stops screaming. It softens. It becomes a mirror, reflecting everything you've avoided. And in that reflection, you see yourself, not the persona, not the performance, but the raw, living truth of your humanity. The descent is not glamorous. It's messy, uncertain, often lonely. But it's sacred, because in that darkness, you start to rebuild your relationship with yourself, not from ideals or expectations, but from truth. You realize that healing isn't about returning to who you were before the pain. It's about becoming someone new because of it. You begin to see that light was never the opposite of darkness. It was born from it. Just as stars are born in the densest regions of space, just as the heart learns empathy only after breaking, your light emerges from the depth of your darkness. When the descent ends, there is no grand revelation, no sudden sunrise. There's just peace. Not the kind that comes from escaping, but the kind that comes from understanding. You've seen yourself, all of yourself, and survived. You've stopped running from the monster in the dark, only to discover it was never a monster at all. It was the part of you that loved you enough to demand to be seen. Now, the world looks different. Not brighter, truer. You see the same pain in others and recognize it as familiar. You stop judging so harshly because you understand what it means to be lost. You start forgiving, not because it's noble, but because you know what it's like to carry the weight of your own unacknowledged shadow. In that realization, something shifts inside you. You no longer chase light as something separate. You carry it, quietly, without needing to prove it to anyone. Your strength no longer comes from pretending to be unbreakable, but from knowing you already have been, and that you're still here. This is the awakening. Not the kind that blinds, but the kind that softens. You start to see beauty in imperfection, grace in struggle, meaning in contradiction. You understand that to be human is to be both shadow and light, endlessly dancing, endlessly learning. When you finally befriend your darkness, the fear that once ruled you loses its power. You don't need to suppress or escape it anymore. You can walk through it, sit with it, breathe within it. Because now you understand, it was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to make you whole. And in that wholeness, you find freedom. Not the freedom of endless happiness or control, but the quiet, unshakable freedom of self-acceptance. You look back at all the moments you thought were breaking you, and you realize they were shaping you. The darkness wasn't punishment. It was initiation. A sacred passage that every soul must walk. And now, as you stand at the edge of the light once more, you no longer fear the shadows around you. Because you've walked through them, and they've given you back your sight. The light no longer blinds you, it guides you. It no longer feels fragile. It's alive, breathing through every part of you, born not from avoidance but from understanding. The darkness didn't take your light away. It gave you the eyes to see it. The world outside hasn't changed. The traffic still hums, the screens still glow, people still move too fast. But you've changed. Something inside you is quieter now, heavier, yet lighter. You walk through the same world, but it no longer pulls you the same way. You don't need to chase light anymore, because you've learned to carry it inside you. It's strange, isn't it? How everything you feared, silence, loneliness, vulnerability, has become the very ground of your peace. The darkness that once terrified you now feels like home. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's honest. It doesn't ask you to perform, to impress, to pretend. It just asks you to be. We live in an age obsessed with brightness. Every corner of our lives is flooded with noise, notifications, self-help mantras, endless advice about becoming better, happier, more productive. But beneath all that brightness, people are exhausted. We scroll through filtered perfection and wonder why we feel hollow. We try to stay positive, while suppressing the quiet ache that never leaves. The irony is brutal. In trying to escape our darkness, We've built a world that never lets us rest. And yet, after you've met your shadow, you begin to see this differently. You start to recognize that every dark emotion has something sacred hidden inside it. Anxiety is not an enemy. It's a signal that you've been living disconnected from yourself. Sadness is not failure. It's proof that you've cared deeply. Anger isn't evil. It's the energy of boundaries unspoken. Even fear, when met with honesty, becomes a compass pointing toward truth. To befriend your darkness is to live awake in a world that sleepwalks in daylight. It means you no longer run from discomfort. You let it speak. You listen to what it needs. And in that listening, something shifts, not just within you, but around you. Your relationships change. You stop needing others to save you, fix you, or validate you. You start seeing them not as mirrors of your worth, but as reflections of shared humanity, each carrying their own shadow, each hiding their own unspoken story. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned that becoming yourself isn't about perfecting your image, it's about integrating your opposites. Light and shadow. Strength and vulnerability. Beauty and imperfection. The moment you stop trying to amputate your darkness, you begin to feel whole. And wholeness, unlike happiness, doesn't depend on conditions. It simply is. When you reach that place, you begin to understand the deeper meaning of freedom. Not the freedom to avoid pain, but the freedom to exist fully inside it without losing yourself. The freedom to walk into the unknown without needing guarantees. The freedom to be both fragile and strong at once. You start to see that everything in life, the joy, the grief, the chaos, moves in cycles. Day and night, inhale and exhale, creation and destruction. The same rhythm that moves the tides moves through you. You no longer resist it. You flow with it. You stop asking life to make sense and start participating in its mystery. Integration doesn't make you perfect, it makes you real. You still feel fear. You still stumble. But now, when the darkness comes, you don't panic. You turn toward it. You sit down beside it. You know it by name. You whisper, "I see you." And in that moment, it softens. It no longer needs to roar to be heard. That's when you realize you were never fighting darkness. You were fighting your resistance to it. You were battling your own reflection, believing it was something outside you. All along, the darkness was your teacher, trying to show you the light hidden in your pain. So now, when you look back at your journey, it doesn't feel like survival anymore. It feels like becoming. Every collapse, every heartbreak, every night of despair, it all led you here. It stripped away everything that wasn't you until all that remained was truth. And that truth is simple. The light you feared losing was never separate from the dark. They were two halves of the same fire, burning inside you all along. Modern culture tells you to find your light, but the wiser path is to understand your shadow. Because when you do, the light finds you. It doesn't need to be chased, it rises naturally, like dawn after the longest night. And in that realization, life becomes quieter. You stop needing constant validation, endless achievement, or perfect clarity. You begin to trust the rhythm of things, the way pain gives way to insight, the way endings make space for beginnings. You stop forcing life, and life begins to move through you effortlessly. One day, you find yourself back in that same dark room where it all began. The single light still flickers. But this time, you're not afraid. You step beyond it into the shadows. You move through them slowly, breathing deeply. And as your eyes adjust, you see it. The light was never coming from the bulb. It was coming from you, reflecting off every corner of the dark. That's when you finally understand, you were never meant to destroy your darkness. You were meant to walk with it, until you no longer fear the light. The screen fades to black. Silence. A breath. And in that silence, the truth lingers. Wholeness isn't found in running toward the light, but in learning to stand still between the two.